Hello and welcome to Miniature Adventures. I'm Big Lee, and this week I want to talk about big battles in defence of larger games. So as is usual, today's video is inspired by something I've recently read. So I got my latest issue of Wargames Soldiers and Strategy, and there was an excellent little article in there by Rick Priestley talking about skirmish games. Something that, I've played plenty of skirmish games. Postage Rejects has played plenty of skirmish games over the years. It's not something we're averse to or have any bad opinion of by any means, so don't get the wrong impression. But we also like to play big battles. And normally when you're talking about skirmish games, you're usually using words like small or irregular or 1-to-1 figure scale, or sometimes it might be like open order, something like that. You're thinking in those terms. So they're usually not many figures, lots of terrain, a few figures, and a really simple, usually, or like I say, a 1-to-1 basis for the figures to person ratio. And there's nothing wrong with that. As I say, Postage Rejects play quite a few games that I would call skirmish games, where you effectively have a 1-to-1 figure ratio. But we also play a lot of very big battles. We're talking about big formed units, manoeuvre, counter manoeuvre, that sort of thing. Big units on lots of different periods. We do play some modern stuff occasionally, very, very occasionally. By modern, I say, I think we stop at about Vietnam, but that's just because of the group and the collections that we have. We have on occasion played some Second World War, a lot of First World War, and then everything else is pretty much 19th century and beyond. So when we're playing those sort of games, a lot of those are going to be what we would call big battles. Now that's partly possible because Posty Stewart, as some of you will know him, has a absolutely huge games table, 8 foot across, 12, 14 foot long, something like that, I think it is. We can get very large games on there. We've had in the past 4 or 5 players on each side, with Stuart umpiring. So we're talking big battles, hundreds, sometimes thousands of figures on the table, and games that last all day. Typically when we go to play in the Shed of War, we'll be playing games all day. But of course I'm a big advocate, and you won't be surprised when I say I'm a big advocate of going small to go large, playing 6mm games, but playing big battles with lots of figures and lots of units, but bringing the scale down so you can fit it on a smaller table. So I'm definitely an advocate of big battles in that respect. It's something that Sean Clark of God's Own Scale you'll often hear him talk about this, being in defence of big battles, because a lot of game systems, and not all, there's plenty of game systems out there for big battles, but there's a lot of game systems coming out for skirmish rules. Lots and lots of different types of skirmish games out there. And as I say, there's nothing wrong with that. We play them ourselves. I've got a couple of sets of rules, the Men Who Would Be Kings, and the games that I've recently put on over the last year or so, French Foreign Legion. That's a skirmish game in effect. Although we've got semi-formed units there, it is a skirmish game. And I say there's nothing wrong with that. Thoroughly enjoy that, but we also enjoy the bigger battles, and it's something that I think that we see a lot at shows, but not always replicated in every Wargamer's arsenal of games that they play. And I just wanted to put a word in favour of big battles, because there's something quite spectacular about that. It plays to my inner child, that lad that saw pictures of Waterloo or the American War of Independence and ranks of troops, and was very impressed, and that's what I want to replicate on games tables. And it doesn't necessarily have to be 28mm figures and an absolutely massive table. It could be 6mm figures and just a reasonable sized table, or even a dining room table would do. You can replicate a big battle. But of course, you can go even smaller than this. Several of the rejects are collecting 2mm armies, and again, they can play absolutely massive games on a regular sized table, absolutely huge. Ray's, I'd urge you to go and have a look at Ray's blog, Don't Throw a One. He's been collecting and painting 2mm figures for Almanza, and that is going to be an absolutely massive game when he finally gets it on the table, and we are going to hold his feet to the fire and make him put it on the games table at some point. But we're going to need probably most of Stuart's massive table to play that, despite the fact that it's in 2mm, and I'm really looking forward to that big battle challenge, you know, with lots of players per side, plenty of banter, and lots of things that can go right or wrong in the game itself. It's going to be a really fun one to play. Of course, if you look through the pages of any Wargames magazine, you'll see lots of adverts and scenarios even for skirmish games, but you will also see big battles featuring prominently in Wargames magazines and very prominently at Wargame shows. You know, only last weekend was at Partisan, and that was very much Big Battle Central as far as I was concerned. Pretty much all of the demo tables were huge battles, thousands of figures, several players per side to push all that metal or plastic around the table. And you know, I think it's something that obviously we don't want to put new wargamers off of the hobby by saying, right, you must now paint 2,000 figures, but I think it's the sort of project that you can certainly take on over a number of years, something that you can work on while you play other game systems, and particularly if it's a group of friends or a club, you can pool your efforts to produce those big battles. And there is something quite spectacular and really satisfying about playing some of those big battles of history out on the table with hundreds of figures, and you know, dividing the command up between the various players and cooperating as you play that big battle out. So you know, I would hate to see big battles fall from our repertoire, if you like. I'm glad to see plenty of old rule sets still being used and going strong. Certainly they do amongst our group. I mean, we're using rule sets that go back 30, 40 years sometimes. Stuart's got his own versions of different sets of rules that we tend to play for our big battles, but between us, you know, we all like different periods. We've got our own collections. Many of us have got rule sets that we play, you know, rule sets like Königskrieg or Volley and Bayonet. They Died for Glory. These are all rule sets that are aimed at big battles, you know, big units, grand theatres of war and large manoeuvre, you know, and I think it's something that it would be a sad day indeed if skirmish games were all that the hobby consisted of. And as said many a time, there's room for all sorts of elements of our hobby, all sorts of different types of rule systems and miniature manufacturers and scales, and whatever makes you happy. But what I would say is, if you've only ever played skirmish games, you really should give a big battle a go, because I think you might enjoy it more than you think you would. And it's certainly the sort of project that you could get your teeth into over many years if you wanted to build a collection. Certainly I think it's something that most wargamers should at least try to partake in, even if they don't end up collecting and painting the figures themselves, if they can try and do big battles with friends. And I'd like to think that pretty much everyone who's watching this video will have played big battles at some kind of time or another. And as usual, I'd like to hear your experiences. What do you think? Are you a big advocate of big battles, or do you prefer skirmish games? Nothing wrong with that, as I say. You know, I'm not criticising in any way. I'm just advocating for big battles, because I do think that there's something about it that sparks the imagination. Certainly it's what got me interested in doing wargaming in the first place. You know, that little spark from being a kid and seeing these pictures in magazines and on TV, watching films like Waterloo, for instance. You know, who wouldn't want to replicate that at some point? So you know, as usual, like I say, what is your experience? Do you play many big battles? What scales do you do them in? You know, are you like me? Do you like to do big battles with small figures, or are you a 28mm purist? I'd love to hear from you as always and hear your experiences and what you think the pitfalls are and the benefits of playing big battles rather than skirmish games. So that's it for today. If you enjoyed the video, please like, subscribe and share, and of course if you want to keep up to date with my videos, please tap the bell notification icon. So until next week, look after yourself, keep gaming and of course keep rolling high.